Hello? Yeah.
All right, so once again, welcome. We are almost the end of our quarter. I'm very pleased that we have my colleague, Professor Sara Curran, today. She will be talking about international climate regimes, so it's a bit different from most of the other presentations where we focused on different regions, but of course this is an issue that is very much the forefront of U.S. involvement with the world and has a lot of implications for President Trump's policies in terms of U.S. engagements and commitments to international agreements. So Professor Curran has appointments in the Jackson School, but also in the Department of Sociology and also Evans School of Public Affairs. She's a sociologist by training, and she's also directing the Center for the Study of Demography and Ecology in the University of Washington. She's a very talented person, can do a lot of things very, very well. And her own area of research has been on mostly focused on Southeast Asia, issues of gender, migration, and climate change. So she will be, as usual, speaking for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have some time for questions. So again, reminder for those of you who have signed up for this class, if you have missed any of the sessions, you are supposed to send me a reflection paper based on the readings that are attached to the presentations, and also the recordings when they are available. So if you don't send that, if you even missed one session, you will not get credit for this class. And next week we will focus on Russia with Professor Glennis Young, and then the last Monday, not all, but some of the presenters and I will be there to bring some of the issues up to date and answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much. Professor Curran.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? All right. Thank you very much. We have several wonderful faculty members who often speak to large audiences, and that's not usually my MO. So I'm a little bit intimidated by the crowd and glad you're here tonight. And thank you to Professor Rashat for inviting me to give a talk. As he said, most of my work has been in Southeast Asia, so this is a little bit outside of my comfort zone. But I hope that what I can share with you might give you some food for thought and maybe not feel so hopeless at the end of my talk. So let me begin. I'm going to give you a little overview of what I'll be talking about today. First, I want to give you a little bit about background of my vantage point, my particular vantage point and what I bring to this talk. Briefly, then I'll turn to what is now being called the Anthropocene epoch and some apocalyptic evidence. And then we'll turn to Trump's threatened withdrawal and how much does it really matter. And then I'm going to then take a few minutes to talk about what we are currently understanding institutionally about the nature of the international climate regime. And I'll conclude with a few remarks about the interlocking connections with other international regimes, and that should sort of lay the foundation for why I'm not feeling so dire. That doesn't mean we don't have work to do, but we can do it. So first of all, as Professor Kasaba mentioned, I'm a sociologist and a demographer, and I do have a background in environmental studies from the University of Michigan, environmental science. My research agenda has been around development and migration, so I've been fairly aware of labor and human rights regimes, international regimes, disasters, more recently disasters and population responses to environmental disasters, and that would be around a humanitarian regime. A few years ago, I did some work around food and trade and its implications for sustainable development, so I became aware of trade regimes. And most recently, in my newest position around population science, and other forms of work, both at the Jackson School and in the Demography Center, understanding in greater appreciation, the international reporting and science regimes that are increasingly influencing how we go about doing our work around the globe and how that filters down to the rest of us. I bring to this work and experience particularly in Southeast Asia, but I have a few projects now that are in Africa, and I've done some work in the southern United States. So I have sort of a global and regional perspective on the world. So this slide has been a little bit. Well, let's talk first about the Anthropocene epoch. So earth scientists you've probably started to notice the word Anthropocene being attached to talks and to articles. We aren't quite, there hasn't been a definitive naming of the epoch, but they're considering naming this epoch, the Anthropocene one, for the ways in which human-made geological signature will remain on the planet well past our own lives. In particular, the epoch is defined, an epoch is defined by its geological signature. And in this case, the geological signature is going to be the rapid extinction of species, so the decline in the signature of biodiversity in the planet, increases in long-lived synthetic compounds, such as chlorofluorocarbons, which were part of the Montreal Protocol impacting ozone, increases in short-lived radioisotopes having to do with nuclear technology, increases in light nitrogen isotopes having to do with fertilizer use, and increasing uniform concentrations of carbon across the planet, as opposed to captured in particular places under the ground or in particular parts of the planet. Many people are pointing, there's a bit of a debate about when this epoch starts. The turn of the century is often where you see those lovely backward L curves. Others suggest maybe post-World War II, 1950s as the real takeoff. Now I'm going to talk a bit about some of the climate models and some evidence around why we should care. And I know I'm talking to an audience, I presume I am talking to an audience that believes the science, but let me just say, you know, you never know. And it's okay to question evidence. So let me begin by sharing with you a quick video around temperature anomalies that was produced in this summer. And temperature anomalies from 1900 to 2016, I think the date is. And these are taking the long-run average of temperature for every country. So the wheel there is every country in the world. And the redder colors, as you see the redder colors pop up, you'll see you'll see them popping up around the globe. And those indicate above average temperature anomalies from significantly above the average. So we'll play this. I'm experimenting. This is a first for me. My 17-year-old showed me how to do this. Yeah. So if you want to take this home for Thanksgiving, it could make a really pretty table centerpiece. Okay, emissions are also climbing, and emissions are driving temperature warming. So this is an image of the time trend till 2010 from the IPCC Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report in 2014. What you can see is the distribution. I mentioned to you nitrogen and carbon. That's the N2O and the CH2. You also have the dark F gases, which are the chlorofluorocarbon gases. Here's another lovely little image. I forgot to mention to you on the previous image that you can see the average, the global average of whatever I'm going to show you right now across the globe. So this is sea level rise. And this is there's a little bit more of a debate around measurement on sea level rise, but it's fairly, this is NASA generated satellite images. And in the lower right corner are the averages, the global averages of mean sea level rise. As you can see, our measurement tools for gathering these data make it a little bit of more noisy picture, but you see that there is an average upward trajectory. Steady upward climb. So you can see that clustering around this happens to be centered around the US because it's a NASA image, but. Okay, how depressed are you? One thing I wanted to mention is that there are lots of people, lots of scientists working on modeling. And one of the things that I want to point out here is this is on the warming, projections around warming. So the colored lines take us all the way to the current year, and then the black line is the projected model of temperature warming. I think I have it. Anomalies, and so increasing anomalies. But what I wanted to point out here is that in this middle band where our science has gotten a lot better, around 2000 or so, we're doing a much better job of modeling how we expect to see, what we expect to happen. And so I'm pretty certain that we're going to get to that somewhere between that 1 and 3. We're going to get around that 2-degree mark for sure. So now, what is here? I'm going to continue with a little bit of more alarming information. One of the biggest issues for humans with regards to climate change is its effect on crop yields. And this map is a picture of where you're going to see improvements in productivity and where you're going to see decline. So a green image is going to improve productivity, and the very dark is 100% change, and the very red is a negative 50% change in crop yields. And these are yields around rice, maize, as well as ground root crops like potatoes and major carbohydrates and wheat. So some places are going to be advantaged. Other places are certainly going to be disadvantaged. One of the things I should say from my own field work in Thailand that is of real concern with regards to crop yields, it's not so much, while this red picture suggests droughts and droughty conditions, and certainly that is an issue. One of the major issues with regards to rising temperatures is temperature affects pollination and flowering. And so we have now developed a fairly refined set of seeds and genetic, relatively limited genetic diversity around our crops. And they're timed particularly to our, to our climate regimes. And we are not yet prepared with new crops that are going to be able to handle the new higher, warmer temperatures. So farmers in the place where I've been working in northeastern Thailand are seeing their crop yields drop because the rice flower is not blooming at the time it needs to bloom and pollinate. Okay, so here we're going to go to my own area of expertise, and that has to do with population growth. I want to just say that we are approaching a leveling off of human population, but it's going to take us just a little bit longer. So by 2050, we will add another 2.3 billion people to the Earth's planet. Most of that growth is going to come from low income. A lot of the rapid growth is going to come from low income countries, but then they'll be doubling their population size. But most of the growth, most of that is going to come from middle income countries, although they're going to start to level off as well. Where are we going to see growing population vulnerability has to do, is, you know, as related to the earlier picture I showed you of crops and declines in crop and agricultural productivity. We're going to see extreme, moderate to extreme vulnerability in a large portion of Africa and Central America and South Asia. Now, I'm going to just point to one major place in which we need to think about this. I'm going to point to two places with regards to the Earth's population that we ought to think about. One is where is population growth going to happen the most, and who is going to be coming into the labor force to work in agriculture, for example. In sub-Saharan Africa, the growth in population is going to be more than 70% of their growth in population is going to come from working age folks in the, from 2011 to 2100. And where are they going to, and in order for economies to meet the needs of those working age population, you're going to need to grow 2 million jobs per month starting now to keep up with that rising number of people in that part of the world. So how do we generate endogenous growth in potential in those places, and how do we avoid disaffection and discontent? Similarly, urbanization is another major trend that we ought to be thinking about with regards to climate change. Most parts of the world are becoming predominantly urban. Urbanization raises a host of issues with regards to climate change. Not only are most cities located on coasts, so therefore they're going to be vulnerable to flooding and sea level rise, but heat, the capacity to handle rising heat levels in many parts of the world requires fairly significant investments in infrastructure that can handle moderating and modifying exposure to heat extremes. So if we look at this picture of future flood losses to major coastal cities that was published in 2013, Nature Climate Change, you can see the 20 cities where their relative risk is large for sea level rise relative to their local GDP. So this would be poorer places and relative rise of GDP. Relative rise of sea level. These are the cities that are going to be most impacted by sea level change. We've got island nations, coastal cities in the Mediterranean, and parts of China. Okay, now we're going to switch gears. Take a deep breath. That's where we are right now. This is why it really matters that we pay attention and we try to work on doing something. Now what I'm going to tell you is that I think that there are a lot of mechanisms and institutions in place, and I'm going to foreshadow the fact that I'm not sure how much it really matters what Trump does for a number of reasons, but we can debate that in the Q&A afterwards. So in August, I guess this was a June foreshadowing, but in August, Trump officially notified the UN FCCC that we would be withdrawing from the climate agreement. Then, just the other month, September, they're not sure if we're going to really withdraw from the climate agreement. Okay, so what are we going to do? What's going on here? Well, I would say, I think you've heard this a few times, there's a little bit of throwing out an idea and learning by reaction in this administration. And they've had a fairly strong reaction from a lot of different sectors with regards to our decision to make this move. And as you know, last week, the US government did send a delegation. We can all comment on who is on that delegation, making the claim for more carbon, how carbon is going to get us out of this bind. But we were there, and we were participating in the panels. I'm going to say that one of the things that's happened over the last 20 years is that there has been a growing momentum, institutional momentum at the global level, mostly driven by the United Nations, and it's been reshaping rules, it's been reshaping strategies, and it's been reshaping norms, and that's had something of a trickle down. I hate to use that word right now, but it's it's reverberated down to the local level. In addition, there are a growing number of regional and stakeholder initiatives and clubs that are recapturing new strategies, trying to take advantage of the new lay of the land. And I think that we might begin to see individuals and communities starting to renorm a decarbonized and healthy planet. And that's going to be my glass half full ending point. Now, it's a complex balancing act, figuring out how to do this. We have the entire planet to take care of. We have a lot of special interests. We have a global governance challenge. And at the core is our, how we're going to fuel our economic growth. And we have special interests, say the developed and the developing world, sort of distinctly different ideas about what their needs are. We have vulnerable nations and biosphere damage happening. We have an entire set of frameworks that is haphazardly being put together, has been haphazardly put together, but is growing in its in terms of its institutional coherence. But it's all consensus driven. This is all based on nations agreeing together and signing on and being a part, and that is extraordinarily difficult. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you that there is one person in particular who's helped me get a better sense of why I should be maybe more hopeful than we might otherwise be. And that is not so much the guy on the left, but it's the woman on the right, Elinor Ostrom. And both Oliver Williamson and Elinor Ostrom won the Nobel Prize for Economic Science in 2009. But it's Elinor Ostrom's work that has been particularly meaningful and informative, and it's because she's interested in collective action dilemmas. And global climate change is the biggest collective action dilemma we have today. And she, in her studies of fisheries management schemes or her studies of water management schemes around the globe, she has offered us some important frameworks for us to understand what might be going on and how we might make the most of what could be possible as humans. So as I said, she's the first political scientist to win the Nobel Prize for economics, and she brought to light how many different kinds of institutions can govern common pool resources, and her major publication is Governing the Commons. What she offered to us, she really helped us unpack this general idea of institutions. And she tells us that there are 3 different ways to think about institutions. There are the institutions that set rules for us, there are the institutions that define norms, and there are the institutions that put in place practices or strategies. And institutions are the mechanism that help us overcome uncertainty. And they help us regulate our behavior. They're fundamental to all of our theorizing in social science and all of our much of our empiricism in social science. Okay, rules. These are generally extrinsic. We make them, we change them. They're negotiated, and they're generally legal. They can be formal legal institutions. They can be informal. So in the case of much of the climate change institutions, these are not fully formalized, codified laws in the sense that you can be held in breach and taken to court for them. So they land somewhere between informal and formal. Norms are those things that are shared prescriptions, accepted by most. Generally, we think of them as generally fixed, but there's a growing work in psychology, and I'll show you a clip at the end from a psychologist in behavioral economics that suggests that we may be able to reframe and rework the ways in which we can help people behave better. And then finally, there are strategies. These are the plans, the actions, the practices that people put in place given a context of rules and given a context of norms. And I'm going to suggest that there are a number of groups that are strategizing within this field, this new international field. Okay, building institutions. The basic institutional framework that guides much of the international climate regime at the global level, and I would call is the set of rules that has been evolving over the last 20 years, is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It's usually abbreviated UNFCCC. I'm going to go through a few of the timeline for the UNFCCC for your own, but they have lovely graphics on the UN page, and you can go check it out. Began in 1990 with the establishment of the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change. This was the first panel to start collecting data, bringing scientists together to help build a science-based evidence for informing policy. And so you'll see as we move down the timeline that we get going somewhat slowly as we're going along. By 1994, the UNFCCC enters into force. It follows on the Rio summit in 1992. And this is when signatures are invited to sign on to the Climate Convention. The Secretariat is set up in Bonn, and then we have the Kyoto Protocol. Now, this was one of the more challenging and is often pointed to as a real disappointment when the US refused to sign on to the Kyoto Protocol and be a part of the convention rules around the Kyoto Protocol. We're going to move. There were just a few things that happened. Not much happens between the Kyoto Protocol in 1997. We really hit a major lull in what happens with regards to climate change treaty negotiation. There are a few events. There's a Marrakesh meeting. There's a, I keep going the wrong way. And then there are some EU emissions standards that are set in place. And then some really important things happen in 2006. And one of the reasons why we have this lull, the United States is somewhat distracted by a few other things that are going on. But less developed countries really are upset about the way in which they are being asked to accommodate and take up the burden of climate change, which has not been, they are not the cause of that climate, the climate burden that they're experiencing. And there was a real push during this period at the United Nations to encourage the more developed countries to start investing in less developed countries' capacity to take up and adopt clean development tools and clean development initiatives. And this is one of the most important mechanisms that's really built trust within the institution and encouraged capacity building in other parts of the world that are growing rapidly and needing to both develop their economies and then adopt climate change, adopt the climate change rules and the collection of data around climate. Then in 2009, we had a major buildup and lots of energy between 2006 and 2009 for the Copenhagen meeting. And there's a lot of talk about the possibility of something being signed in 2009. And in fact, it was a dismal failure. And in part, this was both China and India really put up a fuss about the demands that were being made of them to fulfill the treaty. Everybody walked away from if you look at news reports during this period, directly after Copenhagen, everybody was really discouraged by the possibilities. And meanwhile, the IPCC is telling us that the climate is warming. So as I said, there was a lot of dismay after the Copenhagen. And then, surprisingly, we have not too much longer. We have 2015, 2016, the historical Paris Agreement was adopted. As you can see, there was a lot of activity in this 7-year period, and a redoubling of effort by the UNFCCC to do a lot of things. And what we know now is that the United States is now the only country that hasn't signed the agreement. Syria is the most recent signatory, and there are, and Iran and Nicaragua. Okay, how did we get to Paris when we were so dismayed after Copenhagen? Well, one of the reasons that many people point to now is that what happened was much of what had happened before had been very much of a top-down global governance strategy of pushing on to many other countries the requirements to fulfill and sign up and fulfill the agreements. And in fact, what happened after Copenhagen was a significant redoubling and reinvestment in building the capacity and taking a bottom-up approach. So moving from a centralization to a decentralized approach, moving towards cooperation around how we get to climate change reduction, and not so much holding countries sanctioned over where they get to. So a movement from the upper right corner back down to the left here, lower left. How did this happen? Well, there were a number of funds that were put in place to encourage adaptation and the capacity of countries to adapt to climate change, and investments by major developed countries to put in place support for adaptation. Resiliency, helping governance resilience, helping with infrastructure resilience, and some very strongly linked to the adaptation investments. As I mentioned before, there was the clean development mechanisms, which started creating cap and trade offset markets, and ways in which countries could get funds from the UNFCCC to invest in their own ability to respond. There was a growing reporting norm and capacity to report on emissions, and in particular requiring places like the US, China, and Russia to report on our own emissions in a transparent and accountable way that the other nation states could point to and lay claim to when making their arguments. Finally, the importance of science and the way in which the IPCC has been working closely with scientific ministries of science and environment around the globe to collect data, to analyze data, interpret data, include scientists from around the globe, has been an important normative and evidentiary building base, and built trust around the globe for what's happening. Now, there are also a set of building strategies that are at subnational and regional practicalities that are important. And I'm drawing from the work of Thomas Hickman, whose book on rethinking authority and global climate governance is really useful. But in your readings, you'll see some of this reference to these other outside of the global international regime, how there's other things happening. My argument would be, in relation to those articles that you read online for the class, is that it's not an either-or, that this larger global international institutional frame set up the landscape for the possibilities of these strategies. So I'm going to point to 3 different ones. We can be variously cynical about them. But the first one I want to point to here is the transnational city networks. There are a growing number of local community governments that are connecting around the globe, independent of any requirement by their own nation state or some international governing body. They're voluntary information sharing, self-regulating, capacity building, and they also help each other. They collectively make the case for their own local communities at international UNFCCC COP meetings. This one is the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, but there are several other ones out there. Some of them are sponsored by larger intergovernmental multilateral organizations, but this isn't unique. This is just one of those. Another is corporate private certification schemes. Now, I've highlighted a corporate one. There are also international NGOs that also do certification schemes. I've listed a couple down here: the Verified Carbon Standard, Climate, Community, and Biodiversity Standards. Again, this particular one was founded, the gold standard was founded in 2003 by the World Wildlife Fund, and it sets standards on a wide array of criteria for climate impact. And you can, as an organization or as any kind of program or project that is being implemented and you want to meet these standards, you can sign up to do that. They also provide certification for the products that you produce as being gold standard, climate gold standard. Finally, there are business-related protocols, collectivities that are being set up. And these are meant to say that maybe as businesses we don't need government regulation, we can do it ourselves. So this one, Greenhouse Gas Protocol, was established in 2001. It's meant to provide credibility to corporations for meeting standards. It was set up by the World Resources Institute and the World Business Council together. They have a shared governing board. It's driven by growing consumer demand and in global supply chains, it's demand organizations that are demanding cleaner products. It has been challenged by, critical challenges to it have been how do they demarcate the direct production of emissions versus indirect production, and how do they account for their back-end upstream supply chain and account for climate, gain credibility with regards to their product vis-a-vis climate. And again, there are other kinds of organizations like this that are filling the market, so to speak. There's the UN Global Compact, the ISO 14000 environmental management standards, the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises. These are all business-run, corporate-run organization protocols. Finally, our own government, within our own government, there are significant concerns and interests related to climate change that are not going to go away. The most important of these is our military. The Department of Defense manages bases around the globe. All of them are going to be vulnerable to climate change. They've been dealing with climate security concerns for a long time. There was recently a Jackson Foundation report on how the military is seeking to build cooperation both within the communities where they're based as well as around the globe around climate security. So our own government is not a monolith. It's got diverse and heterogeneous interests and capacities and keen to answer and keen need to respond to climate change. Finally, green markets. Green market economies are growing. So I just wanted to mention, this is a picture of global wind energy coming online and the price of global wind energy and its capacity. But you could look at pictures of solar panels, batteries, electric grids. We're seeing a major change in the energy market around the globe in response. So, norms, changing beliefs. This is harder to measure, and I just wanted to mention that in the United States, we do see an upward tick, a little bit of a tick on Gallup polling with regards to believing global warming is a serious threat. It's still, according to 2016, it still was below not believing it, but just in March, we hit an all-time high of 64% of Americans believing that are concerned about global climate change. Well, how do we change our norms and beliefs? I don't know if you all get your electric bill, but I get my little account every once in a while, and this is when I had two teenagers always working on their computer. This is during also during the winter months. But yeah, when you get a picture like this, and then I think they send you now like a frowny face or a smiley face if you're doing well. Gosh, got me mad. We just started working on it. We started making changes. This is a way of, you know, tapping into a norm of wanting to keep up with your neighbors, wanting to be, you know, being envious. It's a way in which we can nudge each other to do better. And I'm going to close. I'm almost done. This is a TED Talk by Per Espen, and it's just about the psychology of climate action. But now I have to plug this in. Sorry. Wait a minute. Let's see. Volume. Doesn't matter that much. Oh, yeah. Okay. Wireless podium mic. Oh.
Is it working?
Let's see. No. No, but I can play it.
Ask is to notice if you feel the difference as I speak. Okay? Here we go. We are seeing rising carbon dioxide levels, now about 410 ppms. To the RCP 8.5 scenario, we need rapid decarbonization. The global carbon budget for 66% likelihood to meet the 2-degree target is approximately 800 gigatons. Okay, now let me try something else. We are heading for an uninhabitable Earth. Monster storms, killer floods, devastating wildfires, crazy heat waves that will cook us under a blazing sun. 2017 is already so unexpectedly warm. It's freaking out climate scientists. We have a 3-year window to cut emissions. 3 years. If not, we'll soon live in a boiling Earth, a hellhole. Okay. So, now your task. How do these ways of speaking make you feel? The first, detached maybe, or just confused? What's this guy talking about? The other, fearful or just numb? So again, the question asked, how do we get people engaged in solving global warming? And why don't these two ways of communicating work? You see, the biggest obstacle to dealing with climate disruptions lies between your ears. Building on a rapidly growing body of psychology and social science, I spent years looking into the 5 inner defenses that stop people from engaging. When people hear news about the climate coming straight at them, the first defense comes up rapidly. Distance. When we hear about the climate, we hear about something far away in space. Think Arctic ice, polar bears. Far away in time, think 2100. It's huge and slow moving. Think gigatons and centuries. So it's not here, it's not now. Since it feels so far away from me, it seems outside my circle of influence. So I feel helpless about it. There's nothing I can do. In our everyday lives, most of us prefer to think about nearer things, such as our jobs, our kids, how many likes we get on Facebook. Now that's real. Next, defense is doom. Climate change is usually framed as a looming disaster, bringing losses, cost, and sacrifice. That makes us fearful. But after the first fear is gone, my brain soon wants to avoid this topic altogether. After 30 years of scary climate change communications, more than 80% of media articles still use disaster framings. But people habituate to and then desensitize to doom overuse. So many of us are now suffering a kind of apocalypse fatigue, getting numb from too much collapse porn. The third defense is dissonance. Now, if what we know, that fossil fuel use contributes to global warming, conflicts with what we do, drive, fly, eat beef, then so-called cognitive dissonance sets in. This is felt as an inner discomfort. We may feel like hypocrites. To get rid of this discomfort, our brain starts coming up with justifications. So I can say, for instance, my neighbor, he has a much bigger car than I do. Or, changing my diet doesn't amount to anything if I'm the only one to do it. Or, I could even want to doubt climate science itself. I could say, you know, climate is always changing. So these justifications make us all feel better, but at the expense of dismissing what we know. Thus, behavior drives attitudes. My personal cognitive dissonance comes up when I recognize that I've been flying from Oslo to New York and back to Oslo in order to speak about the climate for 14 minutes. So that makes me want to move on to denial. So if we keep silent, ignore or ridicule the facts about climate disruptions, then we might find inner refuge from fear and guilt. Denial doesn't really come from lack of intelligence or knowledge. No. Denial is a state of mind in which I may be aware of some troubling knowledge, but I live and act as if I don't know. So you could call it a kind of double life, both knowing and not knowing. And often this is reinforced by others, my family or community, agreeing not to raise this tricky topic. Finally, identity. Alarmed climate activists demand that government takes action, either with regulation or carbon taxes. But consider what happens when people who hold conservative values, for instance, hear from an activist that government ought to expand even further. Particularly in rich Western democracies, they are then less likely to believe that science. How's that? Well, if I hold conservative values, for instance, I probably prefer big proper cars and small government over tiny cars and huge government. And if climate science comes and then says government should expand further, then I probably will trust that science less. In this way, cultural identity starts to override the facts. The values eat the facts. And my identity trumps truth any day. So, after recognizing how these 5 Ds kill engagement, how can we move beyond them? New research shows how we can flip these 5 defenses over into key success criteria for a more brain-friendly climate communication. So, this is where it gets really exciting and where we find the 5 S's, the 5 evidence-based solutions for what does work. First, we can flip distance to social. We can make climate feel near personal and urgent by bringing it home. And we can do that by spreading social norms that are positive to solutions. If I believe my friends or neighbors, you guys, will do something, then I will too. We can see, for instance, this from rooftop solar panels. They are spreading from neighbor to neighbor like a virus. It's contagious. This is the power of peer-to-peer, creating the new normal. Next, we can flip doom to supportive. Rather than backfiring frames, such as disaster and cost, we can reframe climate as being really about human health. For instance, with plant-based, delicious burgers, good for you and good for the climate. We can also reframe climate as being about new tech opportunities, about safety, and about new jobs. Solar jobs, for instance, are seeing an amazing growth and just passed the 3 million jobs mark. Psychology says in order to create engagement, we should present, on balance, 3 positive or supportive framings for each climate threat we mention. Then we can flip dissonance to simpler actions. This is often called nudging. The idea is, by better choice architecture, we can make the climate-friendly behaviors default and convenient. Let me illustrate this. Take food waste. Food waste at buffets goes way down if the plate or the box size is reduced a little. Because on the smaller plate it looks full, but in the big box it looks half empty. So we put more in. So smaller plates make a big difference for food waste. And there are hundreds of smart nudges like this. The point is, dissonance goes down as more behaviors are nudged. Then we can flip denial by tailoring signals that visualize our progress. We can provide motivating feedback on how well we're doing in our problem solving. Say you improved your transport footprint or cut energy waste in your buildings. Then one app that can share this well is called Ducky. The idea is you log your actions there, and then you can see how well your team or company is doing. So you get real-time signals. Finally, identity. We can flip identity with better stories. Our brain loves stories. So we need better stories of where we all want to go. And we need more stories of the heroes and heroines of all stripes that are making real change happen. I'm proud that my hometown of Oslo is now embarking on a bold journey of electrifying all transport, whether cars, bikes, or buses. One of the people spearheading this is Christina Bu. She is heading the Electric Car Association for years, and she's been fighting every day. Now, UK and France, India and China have also announced plans for ending the sales of fossil cars. Now that's massive. And in Oslo, we can see how enthusiastic EV owners go and tell their electric stories to friends and neighbors and bring them along. So we come full circle from story back to social. So thousands of climate communicators are now starting to use these solutions all over the world. It is clear, however, that individual solutions are not sufficient to solving climate alone. But they do build stronger bottom-up support for policies and solutions that can. That is why engaging people is so crucial. I started this talk with testing 2 ways of communicating climate with you. There is another way too I'd like to share with you. It starts with reimagining climate itself as the living air. Climate isn't really about some abstract, distant climate.
Okay, I'm worried about time and I want to have a conversation. These slides will be up available and you can always take a look at them later. Okay, so let's switch back to Trump. Will he or will he not withdraw from the climate accord? It's debatable. I would suggest that there are enough stakeholders and interests that might prevent him from doing so. Most importantly, he can't withdraw from the climate accord. We can't officially leave the climate accord until 2020. So we have a fair amount of time to make sure that we don't. And I think he and his administration might be convincible. Finally, I just want to mention that there are several other international regimes that are going to be facing and dealing with the consequences of climate and or supporting the climate regime. And these are migration, human rights, trade and finance, and reporting and science. And the momentum behind all of these regimes is not going to stop with the departure of the United States from the climate regime. Okay, that's all. Thank you. So that was a big journey. So I'm happy to take Q&A. Yeah. And I'll try to remember to, yeah, in the back. Yeah. Okay, I can read. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So the question was, or the statement question was about, reframing what I had said. And I would just clarify that what I was trying to say is that it's a multi-layered set of relationships. So you have formal rules, you have set of strategies that have emergent properties, being collectivities of people taking advantage of the space created by the new rules and the new realities. And you have also bottom-up normative changes that are happening as well. And they're self-reinforcing. They can be self-reinforcing. The question that you asked was, what about some pretty big special interests? So the very big special interest is energy stakeholders who have a big interest in maintaining a carbon-based energy system. And that's what I would say. I mean, at the state level, in the UNFCCC, we're talking about nation states. You do have participating parties, and you do have some countries that are particularly beholden to those energy industries, namely the United States. One thing to know about, just as a backside, those are important, and I didn't touch on them. What I think is happening is that those interests are actually trying to create a little bit more room so that they can get a little more time to get some market share in the green energy market. And then they'll be on board. So I think that they're not going to, they know where the world's going. China, if you've got India and China saying they're going to electric vehicles entirely, that is a huge market for those companies. If you've got batteries like Elon Musk's battery potential, which is going to be completely disruptive to the electrical grid systems, the way in which the United States is currently very dependent on a centralized electrical grid system. It's going to take us a while to move off of that, but the countries that are coming online with regards to grid, distributed grids, decoupled grids, they're going to be boosting their energy fast with these new batteries. And I think that that's going to really, that's going to be the next really big transformation, that it'll just flip really fast. I think they're trying to make sure that they can maximize their profits right now, given the current situation, and then they're going to be ready to jump. Yeah, that was a good question. And I did, it is a big, in the article that I shared with you, it's the elephant in the room. Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder what you in this presentation, you didn't talk about current legal processes within the Children's Trust and the California dozen more
Yep.
that are coming up in the court system, towards the Supreme Court. Do you see any hope in any of those?
I do, but I don't know a lot about them. We have an oh, sorry, the question, thank you. I know it's like your mantra. The question is about the possibility of legal action within the United States to hold the United States accountable for damages on a number of different fronts, on health and I personally don't know a lot about that, but I do want to do a shout out to one of our fellows from the EU, what's his first? who is studying. He's here. He's an EU climate expert, and he's come here to study the United States and these particular initiatives, whether they're state-based, state-driven policy, legal action, or individual organizational action. So I don't have an answer for you, but it's a good question. I think that there are going to be many multi-pronged efforts, and I can imagine some suits coming forward from folks with regards to from cities that are drowning underneath, that are going to start drowning from sea level, charging just like we had tobacco suits, going after energy companies. Again, I can see that also like propelling some movement out of that industry. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So the question is, for those places that are going to be most affected by climate change, are places that are growing. Yes, my implication is they are going to grow, but people are going to be displaced. And what we know is that most of the, I can show you a picture, but most of the growth, migrants are moving to northern latitude countries, Europe, North America, for the most part, and leaving the central band countries. And we're going to have to deal with it. The International Organization for Migration, for the first time, its secretariat went to the COP meetings and is now, and this is what I was implying by my last slide, the International Organization of Migration is now going to be collaborating with the UNFCCC to come up with ways in which our international migration regime can better accommodate the inflow of environmental refugees, climate refugees. It's going to be a while. It's going to take a while before they start like leaving in droves. Yeah. I am because I live in Seattle. No, that's why I ended with this psychology. I think that there is going to be a sea change, and that's why I ended with the strategies, the normative, the psychological changes. We're going to start changing our behavior. We have to be more mindful and intentional, and we have to let ourselves be nudged and do that. So I need to get my energy consumption down so I get a smiley face. But I think that all of those ways in which we're learning about those multiplicity of needs and possibilities, I am hopeful. We may not hit the 2 degrees. We may go above it, and we're going to have to deal with the mitigation issues and the cost of mitigation. Yeah.
So in the TED lecture, he told us about like the people who are just indifferent the fact that this planet is like experiencing a climate change, but those people can be influenced. They can be. How those, like, I do know that there still are people that they are denying, they're refusing that climate change is happening.
Yeah.
Like, do you think they're a burden to this society when this society is?
So the question is, there are people who are climate deniers, and are they our problem? Yes, we have to connect with them. I think his argument was we have to make the connection, social connections with people. We have to reach out and connect with them and figure out what their needs are, and help them start to see the possibilities. The other thing is we have rules. We're moving towards possibilities of a set of institutional norms and regulations, and they'll be left behind. I know you can be doubtful, but so you can't change everybody. We can't socially engineer everybody, but we can get to a tipping point, and most people will change. That's my, yeah. Anybody else? Late? Dinner time?
So I think. All right. So I think the best reason to be hopeful is the fact that you're here. That's the first step. You're just amazing. Thank you for overcoming. And thank you, Sara, for a wonderful lecture.
You can do it.
So talk to people. You'll have the slides. Show them the slides. Show them the TED work. So I'll see you next week.
Thank you for coming, rushing back.
Of course. Very nice. Good.
Was it coherent? I was
It's
worried.
perfect. You know what I'd like? So you showed that Wall Street Journal,
Yeah,
you know, the journalist,
yeah.
his name there, he is the son of my best friend from high school.
I wonder if he's a Turkish name.
He's Turkish.
I saw that.
He is like my best friend ever.
Oh, that's so cool.
If you send it to me, I'll send it to him.
I've been actually wanting to meet you for 2 years.
Oh gosh, thank you.
I'll just take a minute because you have other people.
I'm registered for this as an access problem.
I have not, however.
I've been there, but there wasn't anything there before. I'll look again. There were files and files.
Yeah, the high school.
Yeah.
Sure, that'd be great. I'm a librarian. And I also
Okay.
But yeah, I would love to set up the time to talk.
Okay.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
Yeah. Hi. Sure.
Yeah, could you post one? It's Curran. We should take down. That's a good.
You're welcome. Do you all need photos?
Yeah, we're thinking about taking it.
A group photo?
Yeah.
Okay. Can somebody take responsibility for taking a photo? Okay. Scooch in. You can scooch in front of me because I'm pretty tall. Okay. And then you can share with each other the photo. Okay. You guys should get closer because I can't get everyone. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Good.
I feel like that's a lot more work than just taking it individually, because then you need to figure out how many. Okay. I mean, should we just make a discussion on Canva?
Wait, can you guys post it on like the discussion board?
So a discussion where the extra credit was?
Yeah, sure, just do that.
And people could just say their name.
Yeah, like people should just write their names over there. Like the
Or
one
do you
person
wanna-
that's gonna post it should take down all the names.
Should we just get a piece of paper and write names on it now?
No, but like people can say that they were. No, but what I'm saying is like.
Why don't we just
The professor obviously doesn't know what we look like.
we just write our names down on a sheet of paper?
If you wanted just like a sheet of paper, we can all write our names on.
Yeah, and then we'll turn in that paper for the extra credit.
You could just have
Make states respond. And sit on the page. Until then, you don't have to spend your time doing it. You're welcome.
Go ahead.
How can the LCDs, the lesson on
They're getting, you'll see on some of the slides, if you look on the site, I don't know when those slides go up, but you'll see that there are mitigation, they've got money coming from UNFCCC based from developed countries that give into a fund, that give them adaptation funds and mitigation funds. And all of that happened between sort of was already kind of coming into play before Copenhagen, but after Copenhagen, major efforts to get help those countries get bought into participating, and they also had more seat at the table in terms of arguing for transparency and accountability, and yeah. So that was sort of my You're welcome. Okay.
What did they affect from
Well, I think it's serious. You know, the Department of the Ministry of Agriculture is really working hard to invest in new rice varieties that are going to be able to handle the heat stress. It's a very serious situation. Hi. Sure. Do you want him to take it for you? Yeah.
A lot easier.
More pictures?
Yeah, just
Once again.
Oh yeah. Okay.
This is for extra.
Yeah, it's a good one. I don't know what to do.
So like I think people.
Yeah.
Trevor case for climate change, like we should do more for the environment, and the second one included in the tab, like people can be essentially engineered to like they can be influenced by like factors or and like any other things to environmental friendly, and they do more about the environment. But I still think there is
the last verse.
yeah. Like, those, and that's a lot of people. Well, no, that's a lot of people, especially in America. In
America, yeah. Yeah, well, we flipped it. I think we started to flip. But I mean, most people don't like change.
Just do it together.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And that's hard. We have to do it on so many levels. Whether it has to do with race or whether it has to do with lots of work to do in the country.
Where's the next one at?
stays everything. Like we have people with
No, but I want to, you know, do a good job. Yeah, thank you.
Can I just take a picture?
Sure. Thank you. You're
So
welcome.
Sarah,
Yes.
so this is the European Union.
Oh, I'm sorry. I totally messed up your last.
I didn't have time to follow up on Marion's introduction because I was away most of last week.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I would love to meet up.
I'm basically around now. Oh,
I
didn't
listen
listen to it myself. Yeah, that was one of the first classes I had to.
Oh yes, we know each other.
But you know, the Winston Churchill's quit about a year.
Tell me.
Exhausted all other possible options, they finally arrived at the right solution. But some in Europe now have their doubts, I'm afraid.
I mean, you know, the taxation, I'm just appalled.
Yeah, but it was very interesting.
Oh
You showed this graph
God.
about Gallup's responses
Yeah.
in the U.S. over, 15 years
Yeah.
or something. And that kind of confirms what I heard from others, that you had a big momentum 2009, 2010.
Yeah.
A lot of things were happening in the States.
Yeah.
But then Obama came.
Yeah.
So kind of the expectation was, okay, now